So today we're talking about evaluating functions. So when evaluating functions can be compared to a machine where each input x in the machine follows a rule to produce an output called f of x. Two machine functions are given below. Use the given output values and function rule to find the output values. So here's my original. I have x goes into 2x and out comes f of x. So if I put 5 into 2x, that's 5 times 2, which is going to be 10. Then I have -3 times 2, which is going to be -6. So this is our input. It's going into our function, which is our rule, and we're going to get our output. So let's try B. B says x goes into x squared plus 1, and we get out f of x. So 5 goes into x squared plus 1, so that's 5 squared, which is 5 times 5, which is 25, plus 1 is 26. We put a -3 squared, so negative times a negative is a positive. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10. So we're going to look at our function notation. So with function notation, right here, the f is going to be the name of our function. So we might see that as g of x, h of x, g of t. There's different things you could see it as, but this is going to be the name of our function. So this is how we identify which one we're going to be using. Right here, this variable inside is going to be x, and that is our input value. This is whatever we put into our function to evaluate our output. F of x is read f of x and is equal to y. So if you're looking in your calculator and you're trying to put this in, you may see y equals, it's the same thing as f of x equals, and it also equals our output. And then of course, this is the rule that we're using for the function. So to evaluate f of x for equals 3 of x plus 9 for x equals 5, we're going to substitute 5 for the variable x and write it as f of 5 equals 3 times 5 plus 9. Therefore, f of 5 equals 24. And that's because 3 times 5 is 15 plus 9 is 24. So we already did these problems on the second slide. So it says write each of the rules from the function machines above using function notation. So we're going to start with our function name and then equals our rule. So we have f of x equals 2x. And we have f of x equals x squared plus 1. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to evaluate some of our functions. And we're going to evaluate for specific values. So we have f of x equals 6 parentheses x plus 9 close parentheses. And we're going to evaluate for f of 4. So we're going to replace all x's with 4's. And we're going to get 6 times, or 6 parentheses, 4 plus 9 close parentheses. And we're just going to evaluate it, starting with what's inside the parentheses. 4 plus 9 is going to be 13. 6 times 13 is 78. We could do the same thing with f of -6. We're just going to replace the x with -6. So it's going to be 6 parentheses, -6 plus 9, close parentheses. -6 plus 9 is going to be 3. And that's the same thing as saying 9 minus 6. So when you take 6 away from 9, you get 3. And 6 times 3 is 18. Our next problem is g of x equals x squared minus 12. And see, we have a different function name here. And it says it wants g of 1. So we're going to plug 1 in for x. And that's going to be 1 squared minus 12. 1 times 1 is just 1, so 1 minus 12. And that's going to be a -11 because we're taking 12 away from 1, leaving us with a negative number. We could do the same thing for -3. We have -3 squared minus 12. Well, -3 times -3, that's going to be a positive 9 minus 12. We're taking 12 away from 3, so we're left with a negative number. And we're going to have -3. Okay. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to just practice using a calculator. So here's my calculator, and this is the steps we take to solve. We're going to hit y equals, which is top left. We're going to type in our equation, which is everything after the equal sign. We're going to press second, which is the blue button, and then graph, which is top right. We're going to scroll on the table to go ahead and find our X value that we're looking for. These are our X values. We look at the column, or the corresponding column for the output, which is the Y value, and that's going to be our answer. So I'll show you on the calculator how to do it real quick, and then I'll show you what you're looking for on here. So if I pull up my calculator, let's make it a little bit smaller. I'll follow the steps that it says. I'm going to move this over. So I had stuff in here before, so I'm just clearing it out. Okay. So it says first thing first, press Y equals. So Y equals. And then we're going to go over here and we're going to see we have 6 parentheses X. Anytime I use an X, I use this button, plus 9, close parentheses. It says now after I've entered the equation, I make sure it's the same. Second graph, blue button graph. Find the X value in the X column. So in my X column, I'm looking for 4. So I'm going to go until I find 4. Here's 4. And it's the corresponding Y value. So it's 78. You can do the same thing and look for -6. Corresponding Y value is 18. So I type in my equation, pull up my graph, look for 4, look for -6, and that's how I find my answers. We do the same thing for this one. You type that in the graph. Once it's in the graph, you hit second graph, look for 1, 1's -11, look for -3, -3. So now we have another problem that says, well, for this one, if we were doing it in class, you'd go into a breakdown if you needed extra help. But we have the same equation, but 4 different answers that we're looking for. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull up my graph or my calculator. Oops. I'm gonna go Y equals, I'm gonna push clear. Now to get a fraction, you're gonna hit alpha, which is the green button, Y equals, option 1. On the top, we have 8 minus X. Press down, we have X, and then I have second graph, and we're looking for several values here, starting with -8. -8 is -2. Then it says +8, which is 0. Then it asks for -1, which is -9. And +1, which is 7. So we just looked at both of those. So if you type the equation in here, you pull up your table, we look for -8, we find -2, we look for +8, we see 0, look for -1 and see -9, and we look for 1 and see 7. So it's the same steps that I did. We typed in the equation once, we found all the different X values and the outputs for them. So we have a discussion question. So for P of X in the previous equation, P of X equals 8 minus X over X. Is there a value for which P of X can't be evaluated? So we have a couple things that we could think of. We're going to look at the graph and we're going to look at the table. But before I do that, I want to just look at the equation. So looking at here, we have a fraction with an X on the denominator. And there's something that we've always been taught while we're going through math when we do division. There's one number that we cannot divide by, and we can never divide by 0. So that's the part where I think there might be an issue, because I know if you divide by 0, it's going to be undefined. So let's go ahead and let's look at the graph. So we already asked ourselves some questions, so let's look at the graph. So here's what it looks like. As it approaches 0, it goes all the way up to infinity, and it goes all the way down to infinity. But at no point does it ever touch 0. So that's one kind of indication that there might be an issue there. And then let's look at the table. So table, you do second graph. And if you look at 0, it says error. So if there's any value at which it'll give you your denominator 0, at that point you'll see an asymptote, which is going to be like this, where it will not touch, and you'll get that error. So now we're going to go ahead and evaluate this function as well. Since, like I said, you're watching the pre-recorded video, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to work this one. And you could do it by hand or you could do it by the calculator. It's whichever you choose. And I could show you both. So first, when we're going ahead and we're solving it by the calculator, we're gonna go to y equals and press clear. You hit 5 parentheses x plus 3 close parentheses. The squared button's here. If I have a power higher than 2, I'd hit this one, but I have a square, so I'm just gonna hit that one. Second graph, so pull up the table, and we're looking for -5. And -5 says 20. So before I show you again the work on here, I want to show you what you do by hand if you want to solve it that way. You can go ahead easily and put h of -5. And my handwriting is not going to be perfect on this because I'm writing with my mouse. 5 parentheses, replacing it with -5, -5 plus 3 squared. Okay, so let's figure this part out. -5 plus 3. When I do that, I'm going to get -2 squared times 5. -2 times -2, because that's what squared means. It means you're multiplying by itself. -2 times -2 is going to be a +4. That's multiplied by 5, and you get 20. So that's how you could solve it by hand. We just also went over the calculator version, so I'm gonna go ahead and delete that now that you saw how to do it. You can always pause it if you want to write that down. And let's go back to my mouse. And so we typed it in the calculator, looked at the table, found out that it was 20, and it's gonna be 20. So now we kind of learned how to evaluate a function given the equation. Let's figure out how to evaluate the function on a graph. So given a graph of f of x, it's shown below, find f of -4. So to do this, here's what you're being asked, is what the function is equal to when x equals -4. So when we're doing this, we're going to go ahead and we're going to find our horizontal numbers versus our x-axis. Our vertical numbers are our y's. So we're going to find when x equals -4, which is right here. We're going to follow it to where our line is, our graph. So you might have to look up or down. But we're going to go ahead until we touch that graph, and we're going to find that point. Now we're going to go ahead and find the y value for that point. So we're going to follow it over to our horizontal axis, and that's going to be our value. So when x equals -4, the function equals 6. Another way to say that is f of -4 equals 6. Okay, so if you want additional practice, you would go here to IXL and type in the code R96 and go ahead and get a little bit of practice to see how you're doing. You can use your calculator, you can do it by hand, whatever you feel comfortable with. They will get more difficult. If you do get a problem that has a decimal, I'd suggest evaluating either by hand or by using a calculator screen instead of graphing, which I will put some videos on that later. Hope you have a good day, and thank you for watching.